There is so much talk about a self-managed super fund. Buying properties, shares, cryptocurrency, people making millions of dollars. But what are the tax details nobody tells you? Some of these are the key to actually outpacing the market and growing serious wealth with inside your super. In this episode, I'm going to share 3 key takeaways that are going to help you understand how the wealthy people are growing their super or self-managed super fund that the majority don't find out till it's too late. We're going to be talking about tax on earnings, massive CGT discounts, and tax-free income. But how does it actually work in super? This is what schools should have taught you. I'm Jeremy Iannuzzelli. Let's get into today's episode.
Everything school should have taught you in one place. With a property portfolio of over 17 million and an accountancy firm of over 16,000 clients, as well as being an accountant to some of the wealthiest people in Australia, Jeremy Iannuzzelli will be sharing his lessons on everything school should have taught you so you can build the life you want.
Superannuation's been one of these things that I, as an accountant and also consultant, really try to nut down and dial in with a lot of clients. I can't stress it enough, and I've said on this episode so many times, you need to be checking how your superannuation fund is performing. I probably still, to this day, sit down with 80% of my clients and regularly ask them, how is the super going? What's your returns been? What level of contributions are going into the fund? And I get stunned mullets or blank faces. It is important to understand your superannuation is a bank account. As often as you check your bank account on your phone or your computer while you're paying the bills, you should be making that a habit to check how your super fund is performing, whether it's in industry, retail, or whether it's sitting in a self-managed super fund. The wealthiest people that I know, the wealthiest clients that I take care of, treat super probably more seriously than they do the wealth outside because they understand the level of concessions involved, taxes behind it, and what assets they need to be investing in at any particular time to ensure that their wealth's always moving forward. So I want to firstly talk to you about tax on earnings. Yes, if you haven't checked your super fund in a while, that minus deduction that comes out of your statement, whether you're in industry or retail, or if you're paying your taxes at the end of the year via your self-managed super fund, that's tax on your earnings. And your earnings are classified by your superannuation contributions. That is what your employer's putting in or you're putting in additionally via salary sacrifice, and also the earnings being generated from the super fund. And those earnings could be from net rental income, those earnings could be from share dividends, which again, you get back the franking credits if applicable to the dividend being issued, could be on interest earned in the bank account. So it's important to understand that super funds do pay tax, but the kicker is the tax is a fixed percentage at 15%. So whether your super fund's made $5,000 for the year or $100,000 for the year, your super fund will be paying a flat tax of 15% on the earnings for most people under this new Division 296 cap of $3 million, which we'll get to a little bit later on. So it's important to understand that as we generate wealth with inside superannuation, 15% tax rate is applicable on earnings. That's substantially lower than the lowest marginal tax rate based on our earnings as a worker, being 16% on our earnings. And then as we start to go through the various marginal tax rates, our taxes increase all the way up to 47%. Superannuation, great for generating wealth. And then we move on to our second tax, most common tax with inside super. Now, typically you're not going to see this if you're in industry or retail because it just kind of comes out as a tax. It doesn't necessarily give you the calculation of how it works. But if you're in a self-managed super fund, paying the taxes yourself, working with the accountant directly, you would know that when you are selling an asset and it has been held for longer than 12 months, the effective tax rate becomes 10%. Now, you might ask, well, how does that become 10%? And I'll give you a really good example on $100,000. Super funds, if we do hold assets for longer than 12 months, we get a 1/3 discount, meaning 33.33% in this particular instance is subject to no tax. That means that 33.33% gets to stay in the super fund, equating to $33,333. That's the super fund's money tax-free. The remaining $66,660 now needs to be taxed at our 15% flat rate, which in this particular case, 15% of $66,666 is, let's call it the better part, $10,000. That means that we've paid $10,000 tax on $100,000 gross capital gain. Effectively, our tax rate's 10%. Now, that puts you in line with some of the lowest taxing environments anywhere in the world. Even Dubai, where it's been a tax haven for many, many years, has introduced a 9% corporate tax rate. Our super fund's 1% above it. So it's important to understand that as you're generating wealth within super through your assets, don't necessarily look at what the tax implications will be, because it's not going to be a significant amount of the wealth that you'll be losing. Again, 10%, a palliative amount if you got the right investment strategy, which again, I would say speak to your financial planner to make sure that you are selling the right assets at the right time. But don't think about tax as being a major factor of why you should not sell an asset, because 10% is probably one of the lowest taxes across the modern world, especially in superannuation. So it's important to understand, on a recap, we've got our 15% tax on earnings and now our 10% tax on capital gains if we hold longer than 12 months. The question is though, if we do hold an asset for less than 12 months, are we still applicable for a 1/3 discount? And the answer is no. If you hold an asset with inside your super for 9 months and sell with inside a 12-month period, you will be paying tax at a flat 15%. So this 1/3 discount is amazing, but it's also imperative to understand how it's actually calculated. Let me give you an example of what I mean. If you're buying a property with inside a self-managed super fund under a limited recourse borrowing arrangement, you've got borrowings from the bank, your date of ownership starts at the contract date, not the settlement date. And your date of sale starts at the contract date, not the settlement date. So that's where the 12 months is calculated. Further, if you're really looking to time the way that your capital gain tax is paid, you also need to know that your contract date is that deemed sale date. So if you sign a contract on the 30th of June, your tax liability is in that financial year, as opposed to signing a contract on the 1st of July. Now, the tax is not necessarily going to change, but the timing of tax does. And having that money in your bank account or in your superannuation bank account for a lot longer will mean a world of difference. So imperative that if you're holding assets, if you can hold it for longer than 12 months, brilliant, you're going to have an effective rate of 10%. And if you can't, your tax rate will be a flat 15%. Now it takes us on to our last and probably most exciting. Now I get excited about superannuation because I see so many people that have done very well, and I see the people who have obviously failed. And the ones that have failed treat their superannuation fund like a baccarat table. It is not for gambling. Your super is an entity or a structure or a bank account for your retirement. This is your ability to create wealth while you're working, so it can be plentiful in the future when you're not. But I want to move on to the pension phase now. Now, when to start the pension phase? When can we start the pension phase? And generally, pension phase starts at 67.5 as calculated today. There are some ambiguities around that when you reach what they call a preservation phase or preservation age, generally after the age of 60, which allows you to go into your super and take some lump sum withdrawals tax-free. Although you need to be very mindful that if you're starting to reduce the balance of your superannuation fund via lump sum withdrawals, you're not keeping as much money potentially in a very good ecosystem, the super ecosystem, where the taxes are potentially at 15% or tax-free on the earnings when you hit pension phase. So it's important, you've got to speak to your professionals, whether it's a financial planner or an accountant. You've got to get an understanding of the tax implications of those withdrawals if you do take them. And you've got to get an understanding on, if I do withdraw that money, how much potentially am I losing in the tax that I might need to pay on the earnings of that withdrawal. So an example, you might be the age of 63, withdraw maybe $150,000 because you want to go buy a caravan or want to pay off the home for argument's sake. You need to factor in that what am I losing on the earnings of that 150 tax-free when I'm at retirement phase or pension phase with inside my super. Because if you have a super fund that's arguably, say, worth $1.5 million and it returns 10% that financial year, which isn't off the cards, and you're now in pension phase, that means your super fund has generated $150,000 worth of income tax-free. Now, we do need to be mindful. There are caps. As of 1 July 2023, the cap was about $1.9 million, which meant if you had a balance of superannuation, you could convert up to 1.9 million of that balance tax-free. And then the remaining of that balance needed to be taxed at 15%. Well, you might be hearing, well, what a rort, and I agree with you. There's lots of taxes that are coming into super because it's becoming a very beneficial entity for people, and it's a great way for the government to tax it without really impacting a lot of the majority of the population, only the very small few. But nevertheless, as of 1 July 23, cap was around about 1.9 mil, meaning any earnings at pension phase underneath that, tax-free. Any earnings above that, we're taxed at 15%. So still not the end of the world. If you're heading or close to pension phase, Have a bit of a think before you start to take money out of superannuation. Speak to the professionals to understand what you might be losing by taking that money out early as opposed to leaving it in there, where it can be in an environment where the earnings that it generates is tax-free. One of the biggest things that I try to advise people all the time, and a great example that I gave before, $1.5 million super fund returning 10%, $150,000 earning. That's equivalent to someone earning over $200,000 a year and having to pay tax on those earnings. When you're in pension phase, the pressure is off the performance of your assets. Your assets do not have to work as hard to potentially achieve the same result as if you had that wealth in your own name. So it's important to note a very balanced strategy of having wealth outside of super and wealth inside of super is key. Again, speak to all your professionals such as your financial planner, your accountants, or any other consultants you may use, because if you can get those three versions of taxes humming for you, 15% on earnings, 10% on capital gains, tax-free pension at pension phase, you can have a very successful retirement. You've got to make sure you've got the right assets for the right time of your life, and you've got to make sure you're structuring things in a way that you can start to take advantage of the Australian tax system. So now you understand how tax with inside superannuation works. You know how we pay tax on earnings at a flat 15%. You know how the CGT discount works with inside super if we've held assets for longer than 12 months, and the timing of when that asset is purchased and that asset is sold, and that gives us our effective tax rate of 10%. And you now know that there is a pension phase within super where you can generate a substantial amount of wealth or earnings at pension phase and pay no tax. And we've gone through our third phase, which is our pension phase, which is tax-free on our earnings. Very important, tax-free on our earnings. So if you're young and you're thinking that superannuation is not a crucial part of potentially what you'll look at in the future, or a crucial part of your retirement, or a crucial part of your investment strategy, think again, because it will take the pressure off your assets to perform if you're structuring your wealth the right way and getting a huge portion of your wealth, especially the later stages of your life, tax-free. I'll leave you with a bit of a quote that I've heard many, many times from family members, especially in my immediate family, is that, yes, live life while you're young, but try to work while you're old. The things you do today will set you up for the future. That dollar today will be $1.15 if you invest it the right way. And if you invest it in the right structure, especially at the right stage of your life, could be $1.30. I'm Iannuzzelli. That's what school should have taught you. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up, a like, or subscribe if you're listening to us on iTunes and Spotify, and thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. I'll see you next week.